March 6, 1848, County Roscommon, Western Ireland. A family of tenant farmers is about to be torn from its heritage, stripped of its dignity, banished from the land of its ancestors.
How do you represent absolute loss? How do you represent 1 million dead?
During the years known as the Great Hunger, the Neri family, along with 500,000 others in rural Ireland, are forcibly evicted from their homes.
The devastation and the loss of family members is just almost unparalleled.
The force behind it all is a deadly biological agent.
This pathogen can spread, and actually within a month could take out the potato crop of a whole country.
The disaster launches the first great migration to America. A story of suffering and sacrifice, an ordeal lost to history until now. Today, archaeologists in Ireland uncover this hidden story. A fragment of forgotten horror, a relic from a catastrophe that leaves 1 million dead.
Forget me not.
It's a moment in time that will change the face of the old world and launch 1 million immigrants with the strength to build America. "150 years ago, a great famine ravaged this land and sent 1 million people fleeing to a new life in America. But to those who still live here, it's an unspeakable horror they would rather forget."
The Great Famine becomes, in a sense, the Great Silence. How do you tell a story which is so horrific that it seems to be outside the bounds of normal representation?
My grandparents on both sides of my family, on my mother's side and on my father's side, actually arrived in East Boston in 1848.
For many Irish Americans, like Senator Ted Kennedy, it's what brought their ancestors to a new land.
The primary reason, as so many other Irish immigrants, was really motivated because of the potato famine.
For many more American descendants in search of their roots, the Great Silence is only now being broken. Dennis Shanley lives in Los Angeles.
When I was growing up, I knew very little about my Irish ancestry. My father used to talk about his grandfather, Patrick, and that was about all I knew.
By a strange twist of fate, Dennis Shanley's past is linked to that of another family 5,000 miles away. In Ireland, J.J. Neri and his wife don't have to hunt down their history. Their past has caught up with them. By incredible coincidence, they have bought a house on land once farmed by J.J.'s great-great-great-grandfather, Mark, who endured one of history's worst catastrophes in J.J.'s present backyard.
Well, it was very exciting when we found out that J.J.'s ancestors actually came from this land, and we wondered a lot about the family, and we were anxious to find out more.
Enter Professor Charles Orser, an archaeologist from Illinois State University. His specialty? Probing the stories of forgotten people.
So we can really learn in a way that isn't possible any other way of how the people actually live, things that are never written about.
A local balloonist helps Orser explore the deserted landscape, green fields that hide scars of a bitter past. Since Protestant King Henry VIII invaded this Catholic land in the 1500s, the Irish had been forced to serve their English masters. Throughout Europe, landlords oppressed peasants. But here, to the Irish, the outrage cut even deeper.
Looking down over what they would have seen as their ancestral territory, there was always there the sense this land was ours before it was there. This land should be ours again.
By 1845, Still under English rule, Ireland is one of the most densely populated rural areas in the world. Barred from owning property, the Irish are regarded as subhuman.
The lack of real opportunity, the lack of hope, the lack of real chance to develop for yourself and your family.
But 1845 is a time of change. The rest of Europe teeters on the brink of revolution. America hurtles towards a war over slavery. In a village called Ballykilcline, over 80 families are fighting their own battle for justice. They're refusing to pay crippling rents to the English crown. Their rebellion will turn this forgotten place into a flashpoint for one of the greatest upheavals in history.
Likely, perhaps,
in the field behind J.J. Nery's house, archaeologists search for evidence that his family lived through that struggle.
To your left, 2 centimeters. This is a ground-penetrating radar survey in a 3-dimensional mode. Electromagnetic energy is fired into the ground and it reflects off features in the subsurface. We can do a virtual dig on the site before the excavators move in and maybe be able to predict what they might find.
Kevin Barton and his team are scouring the seemingly empty field to hunt for traces of ditches, walls, or debris. After hours of painstaking work, ghost images of a place where the past was buried alive. The first clue, a telltale scar running beneath the soil. Finally, positive proof that the Nery family actually lived here. The diagonal gash turns out to be a drainage ditch, part of the foundations of a house. It's a stunning discovery. Now Orser can start to reconstruct the place the Nerys called home.
If we were standing here 155 years ago, we would see 2 houses behind us. Probably stone houses with thatched roofs.
After more than a century in the shadows, the lives of the rebellious Nery family snap into sharp focus.
See a lot of activity, people in the fields, smoke coming out of the chimneys. You'd see a living, vibrant community.
A community built on a single remarkable plant, the potato, the staple food of Ireland.
What evolved was a man-made crop, which is now recognized as one of the most productive crops in the world. The population went, in a very short time, from 1 or 2 million to 8 million. There was a population explosion.
A population explosion that soon led to disaster. Dr. Mike Coffey at the University of California, Riverside, is a leading researcher into the potato and what went terribly wrong when the Irish staked their lives on it. For Coffey, it's a personal mission.
Being an Irish American, professionally, what I'm doing is trying to make sure, as best I can as an individual, that this never happens again.
What ends in disaster at first seems like salvation to the poor Irish farmers.
By 1845, on this tiny, tiny island, there were 8 million people, most of whom were desperately poor, but actually lived a fairly good life. On a quarter of an acre of land, you could support a family of 14.
No other crop could feed so many mouths on so little land. The Irish become dangerously dependent upon it. Incredibly, the average Irishman eats as much as 14 pounds a day, and the English hate them for it.
It was seen as a lazy crop grown by a lazy people in their lazy beds. It was seen as something which kept the Irish poor, which kind of encouraged overpopulation.
But at the Nery house, Orser discovers evidence that the family had joined a rent strike to protest their hand-to-mouth existence.
Yeah, that's a bank token from the Bank of Ireland, 10 pence bank token dated 1813.
Money saved by refusing to pay rent lifts them a notch above the poverty line.
Thank you, dear Lord.
The Nerys are breaking the law and getting away with it. Their defiance makes them a prime target for local rent collectors. One of them files a report on the troublemakers.
The Nerys are reputed to be very solvent and have encouraged the other tenants. It is absolutely necessary that they should be proceeded against as intruders.
To crush the rent strike, the English authorities know they have to take down the Nerys first. But it's no easy task.
We hear any more from across the way?
Mark, his sons James and Edward, and nephew Bartholomew are radicals with a bare-knuckle reputation.
What'll I do if they come and I'm alone?
Bailiffs come when they were least expected to intimidate the tenants.
Good evening, Missy.
The scenes are horrific and brutal, and rendered all the more so because they don't become just a kind of an individual or exceptional thing, but they become the normality.
Ask him to go on my office and get the rent, will you? All right. I'll have to come back.
After 6 years of living with the constant threat of eviction, one Nery starts to think the unthinkable. Like thousands of his countrymen who have already left for America, Edward Nery faces a painful choice.
There was very little for them to look forward to. And there was a recognition that just beyond the ocean there really was a land, and to many it was the land of opportunity and hope. So people were prepared to risk even their lives, as so many of them lost their lives in the crossing.
It's a decision that pits loyalty to land and family against the promise of the new world.
But you need it here, Edward. You need it here.
Mark Nery's son, Edward, has a one-way ticket to America. He will never see Ireland again. With Edward gone, the pressure mounts. Local bailiffs report that maybe the Nerys can be broken after all.
Come on, get on with it. We've got 3 more to do this afternoon.
The story has been gleaned from county records, contemporary periodicals, and tales handed down for generations.
Hey! Get away from my house!
That lock comes off once you've paid the rent.
In January of 1844, rent collectors repossessed the home of Mark Nery's nephew, Bartholomew.
The sooner you pay... Are you leaving? We'll be back. We'll be back.
Good luck to you. Come on, lads. Let's break this on.
The Nerys celebrate a rare victory over the mighty English. But their joy is short-lived. A deadly threat is lurking in the fields of Ireland. One morning in the summer of 1845, the Nerys wake up to a foul stench. Farmers across Ireland tell the same horrific story.
Their lovely potato plants, which showed such promise the day before, were all covered over with black spots and leaves and stalks hanging down as if dead.
The potato blight smell was unbelievable. You know, it would basically hit you in the face. You would vomit just in reaction to it. People would be in agony for hours and hours after they'd consumed this potato.
A family in County Kerry remembers the growing panic.
The blight thrives like a demon from hell. Some potatoes look sound enough on the outside, but as we touch them, they squash into mush.
Dr. Coffey has injected healthy potatoes with the blight to study its early effects.
The bacteria got in very quickly in this instance, and it's already disintegrating the tuber. You can see it's already a slimy pulp. Within a week, 2 weeks, possibly, this tuber will completely disintegrate. It'll be an oozy slime, a foul-smelling mess, just like the Irish faced in the 1840s in the famine.
All of Europe is afflicted by this mysterious and fast-moving disease. Scientists today believe it first arrived in Europe with seed potatoes, shipped from Mexico. By 1845, nowhere is as hard hit by the blight as Ireland.
In this little vial is the pathogen which destroyed the Irish potato crop. It's actually one of the most destructive plant pathogens we know of. Even to this day, it's extremely difficult to control. Probably more money is spent on attempting to control this disease, this plant disease, than any other plant disease.
Entire fields are destroyed in a few days. In the fall of 1845, panic spreads even faster than the blight. Desperate farmers rush to salvage what they can, but it's a fatal mistake. A local farmer recalls.
They allowed too many spotted ones to get mixed up with the good tubers, with the result that the spotted ones smited the others and most of the good ones went bad. The disease affected the whole district. It was all over. No man's crop escaped.
Under the microscope, we can see the actual spores, which are dispersed in the air. Literally, trillions of these spores can be produced in a very short time. They spread over long distances by wind and rain.
By the time the crop of 1846 is ready for harvest, the blight has tightened its death grip. In Ballykilcline, the Nerries stick to their rent strike. But now they face a terrifying new enemy: starvation. Their struggle for land and dignity becomes a struggle for life itself. By harvest time 1846, the killer blight ravages the Irish countryside. Over 80% of the potato crop is inedible or destroyed.
It's the worst thing you can imagine. The knowledge that if you eat it, you're going to die. If you don't eat it, you're going to die.
Cut that away, John. Put the good bit in the bowl of pre-jug.
The Nerry family is starving.
The same with that, John.
Their landlord threatens eviction.
Don't waste any, John. That's dinner.
The Nerries are ready to explode. The Ballykilcline rebels hit the streets, along with hundreds of farmers from all over County Roscommon. Ireland's landed gentry fears for its safety. An eyewitness describes the mounting tension.
Matters look very threatening. Last week, a large assembly paraded with a loaf on a pole and a placard, food or blood. 2 orders of dragoons are ordered to Roscommon.
Violence erupts across Ireland. Shadowy gangs of militants with names like the Molly Maguires and the Ribbon Men hit the landlords where it hurts. Livestock are destroyed. Manor houses set ablaze. Near Ballykilcline at Strokestown Manor, it's business as usual. Like most landlords, Dennis Mahan is cut off from the people and intends to stay that way. Soon, all the tenant farmers have left to eat is grass and nettles. The famine creates tens of thousands of orphans, a tragedy with an intimate meaning to the thousands of Americans tracing their ancestors.
I know my family's from Ireland, but I want to know where in Ireland they're from.
In America, Dennis Shanley's informal research leads him to believe he came from a part of Ireland where he may have shared the Nary's defiant heritage. Even in the face of starvation, the Nary family hungers for justice.
I tell you, boys, it's not the right time.
I say we go up to the big house tomorrow night and torch it.
We've waited long enough, Dad. I'm not waiting any longer, do you hear me?
We have to strike while the iron is hot.
We don't know what it is just yet.
In the debris, Orser's team uncovers proof of their defiance.
It's a very tiny object, but it's a powerful object. It's a political object, really.
On a fragment of a clay pipe are the letters P-E-A-L, for repeal, a battle cry to revoke direct English rule of Ireland. The Narys are part of a national struggle.
So when we look at that fragment of the repeal pipe, what we're looking at is one of the great mass democratic movements in the 19th century world.
By 1847, it's survival, not politics, that grips the countryside. The blight is in its third year, a year that is known to this day as Black 47. The smell of rotting potato plants is overwhelmed by the stench of death. Even now, the Nary family is too proud to beg for food. But their desperate neighbors look to London for help. Too bad the Englishman in charge of aid to Ireland blames the Irish people themselves.
The great evil with which we have to contend is not the physical evil of the famine, but the moral evil of the selfish, perverse, and turbulent character of the people.
The British government forces landlords to foot the bill for famine relief. But their response only adds to the suffering. Today, children play outside a monument to misery, a notorious institution called the workhouse. This building, and scores like it, held famine victims as virtual prisoners. In the dark days of 1847, 3 million people, over 1/3 of the entire nation, line up for a meager bowl of watery barley soup. One woman recalls her father's ordeal.
There was one large pot resting in stones in the workhouse yard, and in this huge pot was made gruel to be distributed to a constant stream of starving people. The people came by every road to the workhouse for their measure of gruel.
More like a labor camp than a refuge. The workhouse is the ultimate humiliation. Inmates trade hard labor for starvation ration. Meals must be eaten in silence. Break the rules, and you're locked away in solitary confinement. One account recalled.
The victims preferred to die at home. Even the destitute refusing to avail of their open doors.
Many see the landlord's miserly charity as a heartless scheme to force them off their land.
If you wanted relief, if you wanted to go to a workhouse, you had to surrender your holding before you could do that.
The workhouse often kills more than it saves. Cramped and overcrowded, infested with rats and lice, it's the perfect breeding ground for disease. One resident confides.
Black spots gradually crossed the body. Lips became bloodless. It was dreaded more than the actual hunger.
Victims call it famine fever, but in reality, they are dying from typhoid and dysentery. Killer infections sweep through a population weakened by years of famine. The epidemic claims hundreds of thousands of lives. By the middle of 1847, Ireland's workhouses are swamped by the sick and the dying. Costs are mounting. the landlords come up with a cheap fix. Instead of feeding the starving in the workhouse, they'll just ship them off to America. On September 5th, 1847, 111 of the Nary's neighbors have no choice but to surrender their beloved land. A mass exodus begins. It's a 4-day march to Dublin and the sea. But many don't make it to the Irish capital, let alone to the promised land of America. One eyewitness reports.
I have seen a never-ending stream of gaunt, dejected-looking ghost-like figures shuffling along the roads. The elderly and the little children were the first to fall victims to the fatigues of the march.
The heart is ripped out of rural Ireland. All they have left, the distant promise of America.
One of the sad consequences of the famine was that a lot of the brightest and the most learned and the most talented and the most gifted people either immigrated or died.
But Ireland's loss will soon be America's gain. The havoc wreaked by famine turns a trickle of Irish emigrants into a flood. In just 5 years, 1 million men, women, and children leave for America. For many, it's the first time they've ventured more than 20 miles from home. Ahead lies a 3,000-mile voyage into the unknown.
The famine would have still been with them, and they would have been spending 6 or 8 weeks tossing around in the North Atlantic, not knowing where they were going or what was going to happen to them when they got there.
It's a hazardous crossing, sometimes lasting over 2 months, on old, leaky ships. With too many people, too little food, and typhoid raging, the workhouse all over again. On these infamous coffin ships, many, like this survivor, wish they'd stayed at home to die.
Then we'd be buried along with our people in the old churchyard, with the green sod over us, instead of lying like rotten sheep, thrown into a pit and flung into the sea to be eaten by them horrid sharks.
Well, it was an extraordinary trip over here, and the loss of life was very significant. Even those that even got here, many died during the crossing. It was a very hard trip. They call it the Vale of Tears. I mean, there were so many members of the family that died during the passage itself.
The death toll is highest among those tenants evicted from Dennis Mahon's Strokestown estate, right next to Ballykilcline. On one of Mahon's ships, 268 people die. As the coffin ships live up to their name, the farmers' worst suspicions are confirmed. An Irish activist voices their fears.
Nothing could persuade the people that emigration was not a plot on their lives.
Now rumors spread that another ship chartered by landlord Dennis Mahon and filled with his tenants has sunk without a trace. Mahon becomes a marked man. It's dusk on a chilly November day. Mahon is on his way back to the comfort of his manor house. The gunshot that kills Mahon echoes across Britain, fueling anti-Irish hatred.
It becomes a huge story, which is reported in massive detail in the Dublin press, the London press. What has civilization come to when a landlord is murdered in such a barbaric fashion?
That winter, 6 more landlords are murdered. The authorities respond with force. County Roscommon now becomes the focus of a manhunt for the killers.
The place was saturated with police and army and so on, and it increased the ability of the estate to actually evict tenants.
At the site of the Nerys' home, Orser finds telltale signs of wholesale destruction.
We can tell that there was an eviction, that the house was actually physically torn down. This would be the gable end of the wall that's probably been pushed down by the people who had done the evictions to make sure no one could come back and live there. So it looks as if the walls were simply tumbled down on top of any artifacts that the people couldn't remove. There's an attempt to erase these people from the landscape, and they were very good at it.
After a decade of resistance, anguish, and death, the last traces of the Nery family are erased from the land. Like hundreds of thousands of their countrymen, the Nerys now face a heart-wrenching dilemma: to risk a harrowing journey to America or a bleak future in the land of their birth. The Irish village of Ballykilcline in the county of Roscommon has been wiped off the map. Its 500 people lost to famine or eviction. Like the Nerys, the survivors are homeless, wandering down a road to nowhere. But after a life of struggle, Mark Nery reaches his final destination. The famine claims 1 million lives, deaths unrecorded, stories untold.
The famine itself was something that most people didn't want to talk about. There's certain guilt feelings that some people may have as to why they survived and others didn't.
The potato blight never really leaves Ireland, but most of those who raised potatoes do.
So the blight never left. It's very much there. And meanwhile, actually, it's spread all over the world. So now it's a global issue. And it's only because of the use of expensive chemicals, of fungicides, that we're able to combat it.
Flashback to 1848. For Bartholomew Nery, the outlook at home is too grim. The lure of America, too strong. All that's left is to say goodbye. 1 million are dead. Now 1 million farewells cut a scar as deep as death itself.
Give us another tune there, lads.
So if you went from Roscommon to America, you know, that was it. You didn't come back.
In a new twist on the traditional funeral wake, the family gathers in a ritual known as an American wake.
You see, these rituals actually transfer to the living person. And it's as if the corpse is actually alive, but that corpse is now the emigrant.
gathered with their friends before they departed to the new world. They gathered to celebrate, but also to lament the departure of some of their family and their friends.
You could sum it up this way. 1 million dead, 1 million fled. That makes 1 out of every 4 gone. You translate those numbers to America today, and all of California, Michigan, Illinois, and New York State would be emptied out. Bartholomew Neri sets out towards his last-ditch hope, America. But for him and countless others, a distant dream is about to turn into reality. Today, one American will take the journey in reverse, his dream to find his roots in the green hills of Ireland. April 17th, 1848. Bartholomew Neri steps off the boat in Manhattan and swaps Ireland's abandoned fields for New York's gridlock. In the next dozen years, 1 million Irish arrive in New York, and they keep on coming.
They were facing extraordinary discrimination in my own city of Boston. I have a little placard that I remember was from my mother and father's house that said, "No Irish need apply." I still have it in our house. That was something that was very real.
One of the miracles of the famine is that America didn't close its doors. Some of the poorest, in many cases disease-stricken people that they'd ever seen pour in almost incomprehensible numbers into New York, into Philadelphia, into Boston.
And into cholera-infested slums. In one New York neighborhood, there's only a single bathtub for every 1,000 residents. In one Irish slum, 1/3 of all babies die before their first birthday.
I think there was a sense of a real kind of hope that everything was going to be better, but they learned very quickly that the only jobs that were really open to them were the more menial jobs, the laboring jobs.
Bartholomew Neri leaves New York. By 1850, his name turns up on the census rolls in Rutland, Vermont. Occupation, laborer. In Chicago, his cousin Edward also breaks a sweat. He helps dig the Illinois and Michigan Canal. Soon, he opens a boarding house, and there's no lack of customers. An army of Irish muscle will pump up the nation and help build the Transcontinental Railroad. In Utah, one crew lays 10 miles of track in a single day. And as trains hurtle west, new cities sprout faster than potatoes.
You go to Rock Springs, Wyoming, and there's a big Irish population. If you go to Butte, Montana, it's all Irish. That's where many of those that have been building the railroads stopped and actually settled. You can look at these pockets of Irish all across the country, including many of the great cities, Chicago, San Francisco, and the rest.
By 1900, there are more Irish in Chicago and New York than there are in Dublin. Out of the famine, they bring a hunger for justice and the guts to fight for their rights.
Politics was the venue which the Irish saw that they could emerge to being important forces in terms of the country and its leadership, primarily in the Democratic Party. A few became misinformed and joined the Republicans, but we can understand that.
Within a generation, both Chicago and New York have an Irish mayor. And soon, a family of famine survivors becomes America's first family.
It took 115 years to make this trip, 6,000 miles, and 3 generations. When my great-grandfather left here to become a cooper in East Boston, he carried nothing with him except 2 things: a strong religious faith and a strong desire for liberty.
He came back, and the first night he said, "Do you want to come back to my house? I have the films of Ireland." We all went over, the family, there was about 30 of us went over. The next night, we were over at my brother Bobby's house. He said, does anybody want to go back over to my house? I've got a show. What are you showing? The trip to Ireland. So that night, there were about 5 of us who went back. And then Sunday night, he said, anybody for Ireland? And he showed it again. It was really, I think, the time that he enjoyed the most when he was president.
In Ballykilcline, the story of another family, this one almost forgotten, finally sees the light of day.
Finding the artifacts is just the beginning of the detective work, because that's the first phase. That's the act of discovery itself.
For thousands of Americans in search of their roots, the act of discovery starts in a very different way.
I believe I found my family heritage.
Thousands of immigrants left Ireland on leaky sailing ships. Now their descendants return on the wind. Dennis Shanley, along with his friend Maureen McDermott, has come to retrace the steps his ancestors took. Dennis and Maureen have lived the American dream. Now they're tracing their roots back to the home of those who dared to dream. After a century and a half of separation, the great silence ends the way it began, with an embrace.
My great-great-great-grandfather was Mark Neary. He had 3 sons. He had Luke, he had Edward, and he had James. Edward was my great-great-grandfather. And we believe that James was your great-great-grandfather.
For Americans like Dennis, James Neary could be the only link to those who stayed behind. But he'll have to find him first.
This is James, Edward's and Luke's brother. James stayed behind, and he died April of 1860. You gotta feel some of the engraving. You can't read it. 1867, at age 65. If this is the James, which it's gotta be, it has to be.
The Nearys are gone, but they left a message. A century and a half later, it reaches their great-great-great-grandson.
This is the thimble here that we found.
It was at this site.
Yes.
Look at that. Oh,
It's brilliant.
I've got goosebumps.
Yeah, it's quite a...
Forget-me-not. Wonderful.
Touching the thimble was absolutely wonderful. To know that most likely one of my ancestors, most likely my great-great-grandmother, it belonged to her, is a comfortable, warm, serene feeling, a sad feeling. To think about what those people went through, it's very sad. It's very sad. Forget-me-not, it just sums it all up. They have definitely not been forgotten. Definitely not been forgotten.
Across the threshold of memory lies a moment in time of anguish and resistance, starvation and cruelty. From out of the ashes, a few die-hard rebels fought for survival in their own land and built a new one in America.